Hi everybody, this is Ranger Elizabeth at Eisenhower State Park in Denison, Texas, and today we are going to talk about mammals. So, before we get started, what I want you to do is I want you to think for a few seconds about what animals you would consider mammals. So I'm going to give you guys an opportunity to pause the video and talk with your family or your friends or whoever you're watching the video with, and come up with a list of animals that you would consider mammals. So, how did it go? You got your list of mammals? So if your list contains any animals like a dog, or a cat, or a squirrel, or maybe a raccoon, those are all correct. Those are wonderful examples of mammals. So, what makes an animal be considered a mammal? So, mammals have really special traits that only exist in the mammal family, and so we're going to talk about them. The first trait is all mammals have hair or fur. So, if you have a cat or a dog at home, they have fur, right? All right, and if you think about us as humans, we have hair on our heads and even on our arms. So we are considered mammals. So the second trait we're going to talk about is that mammals produce milk to feed their young. So if you at home have a baby brother or a baby sister, your mother used milk or formula to feed your baby brother or baby sister when they were an infant, to help them get big and strong before they were old enough to eat solid food. And so our mammals here at the park do the same thing. So mammals use milk to feed their young until their young are old enough to feed on their own. So the first mammal that we are going to talk about that lives here at Eisenhower is the coyote. So there's a couple things that are really cool about the coyote. The first thing we're going to talk about is his fur. So, if we look at this coyote's fur, we'll notice that it looks like he has two different types of fur. So, underneath, he has this really soft, thick undercoat. And so what this does is it acts as insulation. So it keeps him nice and warm in the wintertime. But of course, we know that it gets really hot in Texas during the summer also. But that undercoat also helps keep him cool in the summertime. So we've got our thick undercoat. And then on top of that, we have really long, slick hairs. And these guys act as water repellent. So it's kind of like he's wearing a rain jacket all the time. So we've got two types of fur. We've got this really thick, fuzzy undercoat. And then we've got these long, slick hairs on top that act as water repellent. So, the next thing we're going to talk about is his face and his skull. So, if you have a dog at home, a family dog, this guy is really closely related to him. So, coyotes and your family dog are both in the family canine. And so we're going to look at their noses really fast because dogs have an incredible sense of smell. And so all of that comes from this part of their skull. This is the nose. And so if you look, it kind of looks like a triangle. So they have a really long, skinny nose. And you can see on the skull here that it's long and skinny. And it kind of looks like a triangle. So that's where all of that nose power sits, is right up in here. All right. So we're going to look at the skull and we're going to talk about teeth, because mammal teeth are really, really important, and they can tell us a lot about what food a mammal will eat and how they will eat it. And those are really important things to know. So this coyote has three types of teeth. He has molars, which are these guys back here. And so these molars are really sharp and pointy, and they kind of look like shark's teeth. And so the shape of these molars tells us that this guy probably eats something that's hard and tough, and he has to pull it off of somewhere. So these are molars. The next teeth we're going to talk about are at the front, and these are called incisors. And so these incisors are used to pull and pick off whatever this coyote is eating. So we have molars and we have incisors. And the last tooth we're going to talk about is probably the most important tooth in the skull. And that is the canine tooth, which is this really long one right here. And this canine tooth tells us that this animal, this coyote, is a carnivore. So he eats meat. All right? So, and you'll be able to see that he has the same teeth on the top of his jaw as he does on the bottom. So he has molars right here. He has those incisors for pulling. And then he has these big canines that tell us that he is a carnivore. He eats meat. So, what does that mean for the food cycle at the park? So our coyote is our top predator. He is on top of the food chain. And you might think, well, a deer is bigger. A deer would be on top of the food chain. But if you think about it, deers are herbivores. They eat grass. But this coyote will sometimes go for deer. If he's feeling lucky, he will go and he will try to eat a deer. So that means that this guy is on top of the food chain. So the next animal we're going to talk about is a little smaller than this guy, but he has a lot of the same traits as our coyote. So we talked about our top predator, which was our coyote. And the next mammal we're going to talk about is our bobcat. So I have a bobcat pelt here, and there's a couple things we're going to talk about with this. So our bobcat has the same types of fur. He has those two types of fur. Remember that thick undercoat keeps him warm in the winter and cool in the summer. And he has those slick top hairs that act like a raincoat. But you'll notice on this bobcat that his fur's not as big and bushy as our coyote. That's an interesting trait because bobcats are mostly nocturnal, which means that they hunt and are active at night. And so their hair is a lot sleeker and thinner than our coyote was. And so this helps him be sneaky and sneak around at night. So another cool thing about bobcats is underneath, if you look at his belly, he has polka dots on his belly. So all of our bobcats, that's a great way to tell whether a bobcat is a bobcat. If they have polka dots on the sides of their tummies and down on their bellies. So that's a cool way that we can tell if it's a bobcat or a coyote, as we look for those polka dots. So now we're going to move to his skull and his head. You remember on our coyote that he had a really long, skinny nose? Not so much with this guy. This bobcat has more of a round nose and a round skull. And so that tells us that his sense of smell is not as well developed as our coyotes, but they make up for it with their eyesight. So we're going to turn to our replica skull, and you'll be able to see that he has really big eye sockets. And so that tells us that this guy is in fact nocturnal. He has those big eyes to help him see at night. And his nose is a lot shorter than our coyotes. So his sense of smell is still pretty good, but it's not as good as the coyotes. Next, we're going to talk about teeth again. So he has 3 types of teeth. He has these sharp, pointy molars. All right, he's got these incisors in the front. And then, oh, looky there, we've got a canine tooth, which tells us that this guy is a carnivore. So, what do bobcats eat? So, our bobcats, we consider them to be what we call an indicator species. So, a big part of the bobcat diet is rabbits. And we have a lot of rabbits here at the park. We have swamp rabbits and we have cottontails. And so when it comes around to breeding season, and our bobcats are out and hungry, we can tell by how many rabbits we see around the park whether our bobcat population is doing well or if it's not doing too hot. So if we have a lot of rabbits, that means we're going to have a lot of bobcats. And if we don't have a lot of rabbits, that means that our bobcats aren't going to be as common. So that's what we call an indicator species. So if we have a lot of rabbits, that means we're going to have a lot of bobcats. All right. So we've talked about our coyote, and he had the big, thick fur to keep him warm in the winter and cool in the summer. We've talked about our bobcat, who is nocturnal, and he has these big eyes to help him see at night. So the next mammal we're going to talk about is one of my personal favorites, and he has some really special teeth that we're going to talk about. So let's go meet him. So we talked about our coyote and our bobcat. The next mammal we're going to talk about is my personal favorite. We're going to talk about the possum. So possums are really special. They are the only marsupials in North America. So what marsupial means is that they are mammals that when they give birth, their young are really small and really underdeveloped. And so those young will move into a pouch on the mother's belly and live there and grow and nourish and get strong until they're ready to hit the real world. So another example of a marsupial is a kangaroo or a koala, but we don't have any of those here. So that's why this guy is so special, because he is the only marsupial we have in North America. So let's look at a couple things on our possum. We have thick, fuzzy fur, just like our coyote and our bobcat. So we have this thick undercoat. That's the white part right there. And then on top we have these dark gray to white hairs. So again, that's our two coat types. We have our insulation for keeping warm in the summer or keeping warm in the winter or keeping cool in the summer. And then we have our water repelling coat on top. It's kind of like him wearing a rain jacket. So this possum doesn't have one, but most possums have what's called a prehensile tail. And so it's a really long, skinny tail. It kind of looks like a rope. And they use that tail to hang from tree branches when they sleep and to grip onto things. And they also use it for balance when they're climbing. So that tail is really important. So the next thing we're going to talk about is his face and his skull. So this guy has a really short nose and short face, but it looks more like a coyote's because it's long and skinny when compared to our bobcat, who had kind of a flat nose, flat and round. So this guy eats a lot of different things, and we can tell that by looking at his teeth. So we have our three types of teeth. We have our molars, which are back here. And you'll notice that these molars look a little bit different than our bobcat and coyote molars look like. We do have some molars that are pointy and sharp, but then back here, these molars are more flat. And so that tells us that this guy eats a bunch of different things. So we've got our molars, and then we've got our incisors in the front. And then, looky there, we've got a canine tooth. So that tells us that this guy eats meat as part of his diet. So, most possums can have a pretty bad reputation. People think that they're dirty and that they're kind of gross. But I bet that I can change your opinion on possums with one statement. You ready? A possum's favorite food in the whole world is ticks. They love to eat ticks. We don't like ticks very much, but they are part of nature. So we love possums because they love to eat ticks. But as we saw on our replica skull, that they have a bunch of different teeth, which means that they don't just eat ticks. They do eat meat because they have that canine tooth. And sometimes they'll eat plant material. So they'll eat fruit or nuts or pretty much anything they can find. So they're not contained to eat just ticks. They can eat a lot of different things. So the last mammal that we're going to talk about is a little bit different than the bobcat, the coyote, and the possum. So let's go meet him. So we've talked about our coyote, our bobcat, and our possum. And the last mammal we're going to talk about that lives here at Eisenhower is the rabbit. So we've got our replica rabbit skull. We've got our rabbit pelt. Now this rabbit pelt is a little different. He's a different color than most of our rabbits here, but we can still learn a lot from it. So our rabbits have one type of fur when compared to the rest of the mammals we looked at today, where they had two types. This rabbit only has one. He has really soft, slick fur, but it's really thick, and so that is that insulation layer, so it keeps him warm in the winter and cool in the summer. And so the next thing we're going to talk about is on this rabbit we have these really big feet. And so rabbits have really big feet, and they use those big feet to move really fast, to move away from predators and to move away from different obstacles. So they have really big, fast feet. So we're going to look at the skull on this guy because it's a little different than the other ones we've seen today. So rabbits only have two types of teeth. They have molars right here, and you'll see that these are really flat. There's no sharp edges on them. They're really flat, and so that tells us that these are used for grinding up things that are hard to digest. So we've got our really flat molars, and then we've got our incisors. All right, so you'll notice that this guy does not have a canine tooth. So what does that tell us? It tells us that this guy does not eat meat. He eats plant material. He eats things like nuts and berries and grass and leaves and anything that he can find. But he does not eat meat. He is an herbivore. So he eats plant material. And so on his skull, you'll notice that it's thinner than the other skulls that we've seen today. And the eye socket and the nose take up the majority of this guy's skull, which means that he has a pretty small brain, but that doesn't mean that he's not intelligent. Rabbits are some of the smartest animals that we have here on the park, but they use these big eyes to see really well, and then they have that long nose that helps them smell. Rabbits have a really good sense of smell. So these guys have only two types of teeth. They are not carnivores, they are herbivores, and they have really big feet for moving around and jumping and running away from predators. So, to wrap up our program for today, we talked about what traits make animals be considered mammals, and we talked about two of them. The first one was that mammals have hair or fur, and the second one was that mammals use milk to nourish their young. And then we talked about 4 of the mammals that we have here at Eisenhower. We have our coyote, who had the really long nose for his amazing sense of smell. We had our bobcat, who has really powerful eyes so he can see at night. We had our possum, who is omnivorous, so that means he eats a lot of different things, but his favorite food was ticks. And then we have our rabbits, who have 2 types of teeth. Instead of 3, they only have 2. They have incisors and molars, and that means that they are herbivorous, so they only eat plant material. So, before we leave, I'm going to give you guys a trivia question. Do you know what the Texas state mammal is? We actually have 2. The first one is the Texas longhorn, and he is our state large mammal. We don't have any here on the park, but I'm going to give you a chance to pause the video because we do have the Texas state small mammal here on the park. So talk amongst yourselves, see if you can figure it out, and I'll come back and give you the answer. All right, did you think about it? So our Texas state small mammal is, drum roll, the 9-banded armadillo, which we do have here at Eisenhower. The armadillo is really cool because he walks around in full body armor. So his skin is really thick and it's really hard. And so it helps him because armadillos eat insects. They love ants. They eat anything from ants to termites to beetles and any other insects you can think of. But this armor helps him because the insects can't get through the armor to his soft skin and irritate him. So he is fully protected when he goes out looking for prey. And why is he called a 9-banded armadillo? Because he has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 bands around his belly that give him mobility and help him move around. So that's why this guy is called the 9-banded armadillo, and he is our Texas state small mammal. Thank you guys for joining me this afternoon for our virtual program about mammals. I had a lot of fun. I hope you guys learned a lot of stuff. Once again, my name is Elizabeth. I am the interpretive ranger out here at Eisenhower State Park in Denison, Texas. And I really hope to see you guys camping or hiking or coming out to visit the lake. So come on out and visit us. And I hope you guys have a great day. Bye.